Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans worldwide. We had a wrap up of yesterday's boxing with the shocking but not quite shocking upset of Mr. Gary Russell Jr. by Mark Masayo. Of course, Mark Masayo is promoted by Manny Pacquiao, and you heard on my previous episode, it would not surprise me to see Masayo get the W, and it was a majority decision, which I suspected it was going to be a close decision. I didn't think it was going to be wide because it's not that Masayo's a bum or any of that. It's just, it's Russell. Russell has a very precise style that would be very difficult to beat, but not impossible, depending on the style. Now, a couple things were discovered, and we talked about it when I covered it before, but I want to reiterate a couple things we knew or learned was that Russell apparently had injured his, we believe it's his rotator cuff, possibly somewhere around the fourth round or shortly about it. But this was based on an injury he had going into the fight. So he mentioned on the podcast that he went on, I think it was the DAZN boxing show. He said that he was going to be going into the fight injured. He wasn't going to say what the injury was because he didn't want to make an excuse, but he was going in injured. And he was going to fight as much as he could. Now, I purposely did not watch the fight. And the reason I didn't is because I knew one of two things was going to happen. Messiah was going to get robbed or he's going to win a close decision. I already knew that. So there was no value in me watching. And we knew that Russell was going in injured. I think that skewed things. The bookies kind of shifted, but they were still all Russell. So if you bet on Magsayo, you were getting 4-1 odds for him. And kudos to him for getting the win. Of course, Magsayo didn't really do anything spectacular. He was the aggressor constantly. But Russell was very effective when he did throw a jab. Of course, he's fighting with one arm for the remainder of the fight for the last 8 rounds. But when he started using the jab, he was very effective with it. You know, Magsayo outlanded him. And, you know, some people like NSB and others are just about, he outlanded him deep, deep, deep. There's a little bit more to that. We need to think about defense. Defensive brilliance clearly leans towards Russell. However, Russell did have to be pulled into war on occasion. Now, I wouldn't say that it would have changed the fight outcome. I do think that some people are giving Magsayo a little bit more credit than he probably deserved for the fight based on everything that I'm seeing with respect to the highlights and the scores and the basic outcome and the kind of general sentiment from the boxing community. The general sentiment from the boxing community is that Magsayo was able to connect on Russell, which is unique. But we have to take into factor that Russell's working with one arm. So he's not able to deflect punches as much as he might have done otherwise. And he had to kind of use movement. And Magsayo was able to catch Russell on occasion whenever Russell stopped moving. But Russell was moving a lot, especially in the championship rounds. And so when you see the context of the fight from that angle, and you see that he's fighting with one arm, we really can't give too much credence to Magsayo because we know that a 2-armed Russell probably would have gotten a dominant decision. He probably wouldn't have got the knockout, but he would have got a dominant decision based on what we saw. And a lot of the effectiveness of Magsayo came from Russell being essentially crippled in the fight. But with Russell being able to fight with one arm and essentially take minimum, 5 rounds, that's not good. So let's look at it as a macro level and understand that it's a good win for Magsayo. I expected there would be some sort of an upset potential because Russell was coming in injured, because of all the things that happened. I called on the episode, so I'm not saying that Russell's a bum or Masayo's a bum or any of this. Go back and listen to the episode. I said, because of all these factors building up with Russell, I wouldn't be surprised to see an upset, and that's what we saw. But we didn't see this stellar, amazing next Manny Pacquiao performance as might have been predicted from certain outlets of the boxing community. That's not what you saw. What you saw was a guy who struggled with another guy who was crippled. We should never see that if you're at the championship level. Masayo's the champion now. He upsets Mr. Gary Russell Jr. for the WBC Featherweight title that he's held for almost 10 years. He was the longest reigning world champion prior to this loss. And so this is a signature win for Magsayo. It really is. Even regardless of the injury, it doesn't really matter. Russell said he wants a rematch. He's unlikely to get one for 2 reasons. One, we don't know what the severity of the injury is and how that's going to affect his career going forward. Some people have talked about arthritis potentially, because if it's something with the shoulder or something else, and I can speak to this directly. If it's something that's like a persistent thing, it's never going to go away, it's going to be harder for him to fight the style. This is Russell. Harder for him to fight the style that he's always fought, because he's always depended on having strong arms effective arms to be able to throw effective shots. He's been pretty conservative with his throws. Like, he doesn't go out there and just bomb out guys. He's done it on occasion, but it's not his common style. He normally will try to be very conservative, hold back punches unless he knows he can land, and try to be as precise as possible. He doesn't like Floyd Mayweather, so don't say he's the next Floyd. He's not. It's just that he has chosen to have a very conservative fight style, which has preserved him up to this point. But remember, Russell's in his 30s. I mean, geez, I'm way older than Russell, and I feel it. So I can only imagine when you are a fighter, pro fighter at that level, regardless of the once a year, it doesn't even matter. He still has to spar. He still has to train. You're still doing the rigor necessary to get ready for fights. So I can only imagine at his level, given what I'm feeling, and I'm nowhere near his, what he must be feeling. So I'm not trashing Russell, but I do think that there's a lot that's kind of stacking up against him in terms of longevity in the business. And we'll see where he goes from here, but it's going to be really hard for him to sell getting back in there with a champion. I do suspect that there's going to be some young up-and-coming hungry lion that will get an opportunity to get the fight because they see he's vulnerable and they want to kind of get that name on the resume. Oh, the guy that fought Loma and was a champion for nearly 10 years. I want to get into that. And I think that's going to be the only outlet for him for his get back is somebody who's on the come up, or a soft touch, right? That's has no chance. We don't think he has a chance, but the promoters are trying to push this soft touch and he gets a chance. But I don't think he's going to get very many title shots because remember, when he was a champion, people didn't want to fight him for whatever reason. It doesn't matter the reason. They didn't want to fight him. Now that you don't have a belt, it's going to be a lot harder to sell that people should fight you because you don't have that trinket that attracts that kind of attention. And I would call out, some people were giving him some crap because he had called out Terrence Crawford and said, I'll fight you right now. Let's put it in perspective. That was years ago. And at the time, it was prior to what happened with his father. It was prior to the vast majority of his injuries. He was in a different state then. He was in a much better physical condition at the time. It's just only gotten older, so we could make the case that Crawford might be aging him out. Of course, Crawford's never going to fight him. But my point is that at the time that Mr. Gary Russell Jr. called out Terrence Crawford, Mr. Gary Russell Jr. was in a spot where he could have been a threat to Crawford, and we just saw Mr. Gary Russell Jr. with one arm damn near win against this dude that was very aggressive, coming forward all the time. People talked about it might have been a robbery. I don't agree. You got to understand Russell's style. He is there to impress the judges, and that's what he does. He impresses the judges with a style that is impressive. It's not just about aggression or ineffective aggression or whatever. It's not about who just lands more punches. There's a lot more to it, and I think the judges saw that. Do I think the score is a little close? Maybe, but at the end of the day, you got to understand that it's the champion. We used to have this narrative running around NSB in particular about take it from the champion. So if we were being honest and we're being consistent and we're not being hypocrites, we should be saying, let's take it from the champion. And the scores are pretty fair that Magsayo did just enough to take it from the champion. So give him his credit for beating Mr. Gary Russell Jr., a really tough competitor. And we may or may not get a rematch. It's doubtful that we do. And I think that Magsayo is going to be slim pickings for whoever fights him next because that division is stacked. And you got a lot of tough fighters. I think the vast majority of them beat Mark Magsayo. That's just my opinion on the matter. So you could have another Corey Spinks situation here where Magsayo just happens to be a transitional champion for somebody else to come along and take that belt away from Mark Magsayo. We don't know. So interesting outcome. Not unexpected, but a very interesting outcome. It shakes up the division very slightly, only because Mr. Gary Russell Jr. has been around for so darn long. He's been kind of at the brand and has kind of been a mainstay. And it's kind of like Rig and Diao, where some of these guys, they're just there, and then for whatever reason they meet their maker and they take a loss, and some recoup and some don't. And as you get older, it gets harder to stay at the top level. And that's what I think we're going to see with Russell. I believe we're going to see a harder time for him to get back into the groove. I think he wants to stay fighting. I think he still has the heart for it. I don't think he wants to sit out. He's talked about wanting to step it up, but he knows that it's harder and harder when you got physical damage and it's holding you back, plus all the emotional stuff he has to deal with. I mean, it would take him a long time to really get completely past the vast majority of it. And if you just had another injury that's so bad that you couldn't use the arm at all, that's going to take some recovery. You're figuring probably 3 months to 6 months, depending on what it is. Might be longer, but I doubt it. It's probably rotator cuff, so figure 6 months-ish, right? So if that's true, and you have that, you've already burned half the year, and you're already at the point where you had one fight. Then you have to train. So now he might be able to pull two fights, but then what happens if there's something that, he does the training or he does the therapy and he gets injured again? There's so many question marks now with that one. And I don't envy his position. It's tough, especially when you've been at the top level. I suspect he's made enough money that he doesn't necessarily need to do it. And so perhaps he loves to do it. Maybe he can, kind of transition to helping Gary Antoine, because Gary Antoine's about to have some fights. He's about to get into a fight. Apparently, he's going to be coming up on the undercard. There was talk about having him fight Victor Postal, if I believe I saw that somewhere, sometime in February. Well, that's a huge fight. That's huge. That's big. If that happens, I don't know if it will, but we have to see what's going to happen with the future with Mr. Gary Russell in the short term. And in the meanwhile, we've got a new champion, a change in the division, and what to see where we go from here. So again, we got some very exciting fights coming up in the future, especially in February. Really exciting fights coming. Boxing is it's in a healthy state. I wouldn't say it's on the decline. It's in a healthy state. But as I said in the other episode, kind of the old guard is transitioning out. I see Gary Russell Jr. as part of that old guard. It's transitioning out. So this tells me we might very well see, as I predicted, potentially Mario Barrios getting the upset against Keith Once Upon a Time Thurman. Let's hope not, but we might see that as well, because we might see, again, these young, hungry fighters who are coming up, and they just pull it out, and they upset the major top dog and make a name for themselves and make history. We could be seeing the slow evolution into a new era of boxing, and I'm excited. I mean, I think you should be excited too, because boxing has been kind of in a stale state for a very long time. It kind of still is, but it's been in a stale state, and hopefully we can get to the point now where more eyes are on the product. I know people hate Jake Paul, but he's brought eyes back to the product. And when you headline certain fights where they go out there and they try to actually win the fight, I think you have a strong business. You have a strong industry. I want to do a brief mention really quick because I don't think there's going to come anything of it, but I want to just at least mention it. Bob Arum, Top Rank CEO. He's been trying to get fights with Deontay Wilder because he realizes that Deontay Wilder is a draw. He can say what he wants in public, but at the end of the day, he knows Deontay Wilder draws money. Period, point blank. He draws money because he is a character. And his character, he has sold fights every single time. Tyson Fury is also good about selling the fight and being kind of that character up front. But I don't think there's anybody like Deontay Wilder in what we think of in traditional boxing. Deontay Wilder is one of those throwback type promoting boxers. He's able to say controversial things that, somebody else in the older era could have said and nobody would have blinked an eye, but just because it's current, he gets outside of criticism. But now we've got Bob Arum. He's got an eye test fighter that he's trying to push forward. His name's Jared Anderson. I don't rate Jared Anderson at all. And I think it's a mistake for Arum to come out and talk this dude up. But he's an eye test fighter. He's 11-0. He's knocked out everybody he's fought. And Arum saying, yeah, Wilder's good and he fights all that. But, this guy, Anderson, he beats him. This guy's going to be the next champion when Fury retires. And this guy's this, that, and the other. No, come on. Jared Anderson is not even close. Deontay Wilder would catch him with that right hand within 5 rounds. And you can bank on that. The fight's never going to happen because, number one, you got the whole PBC and Top Rank. And Jared Anderson, nobody knows who he is. He's not a draw. He's not going to move the needle. And there's no reason for Wilder to fight the guy because Wilder's going to be, if he does come back, we don't know that. If he does come back, there's no reason for Wilder to step backwards as this would be. This would be a huge step backward. This would be basically Bob Arum setting up potentially a robbery to help Wilder out the door. No, don't take the fight. Because even if you do knock the dude out, what does it get you? Nothing. Except knocking out an eye test fighter and then you get criticism from NSB because you're fighting bums. No, don't fight this dude. The only person I want to see, if Wilder comes back, there are only 2 fighters I would like to see Wilder fight. The only 2. For me, Big Baby Miller or Prince Charles Martin. And you're like, what? Here's the thing. Big Baby Miller has been talking all sorts of crap about Deontay Wilder. He's done it for pretty much the span of time that Deontay Wilder has been a champion. He has consistently talk down to Deontay Wilder. I would love, and then of course, Joshua calls him Big Pharma Miller because Miller failed PEDs 3 times. We heard Wilder, these guys going to do these PEDs. You're just going to do it. Okay, go and baptize him, right? Knock him out for the good of the sport. Take his O, get him out of relevance, get him out of the way. That's why I want to see the fight, because I know Wilder sparks him out, and I want to see it to shut him up and get him out of the way so that he is no longer disrupting people's sentiments about how good he is or isn't. With Prince Charles Martin, I told you, I don't rate the dude at all. The problem with Martin, I think, is because he does do a decent performance now after the whole Joshua where I think he took a dive. But the point is, he does do a decent performance now. He does look decently good. And so people are now chatting about him about, well, look, he almost beat Ortiz. Da, da, da. Just knock him out, get him out of the way so people can shut up about these guys. Like, get rid of some of these ones that are at that B tier. Get him out of the way. Just erase him. Literally erase him with that right hand. Get him out of the way so that we can start focusing back on the true stars of the division. And no, I don't mean Frank Sanchez. Would I want to see Wilder in with Frank Sanchez? No, because Sanchez would stink the joint out. And I do think he gets caught with the right hand. We don't know his chin because he's never been tested because he never stepped up. And no, Ife Ajaba was not a test. He was a eye test fighter again. So I don't rate Sanchez. I don't want to see that fight. It'd be a boring fight. I want heavyweights that I know would go in there and try to entertain me. That's why I would like to see Big Baby in with Wilder, because I know it'll be entertaining. The build-up be entertaining. The pressers will be entertaining. The hype would be off the chains. And then Prince Charles Martin, he talks a little bit, but he doesn't talk anywhere near like these other ones. But the way that he's able to look at least decently passable in there, okay, then Wilder could go in there and put him to sleep. Take him out so that we can stop talking about the dude. Some people talk about Dillian White for an eliminator. No, because you know that Wilder's going to spark White out. There's no way. And do you really want to see Wilder Fury 4? I do, but I don't think those two guys do. I don't think they want to get in the ring with each other anymore, and I don't blame them. I would love to see it, but there's no value, I don't think. I think it would sell huge. Honestly, I do think that one would sell major tickets, but I don't think there's value in doing it. Now, that said, we could end up with a Pacquiao Marquez 4 situation where Wilder goes in there and puts Tyson to sleep. I just don't see it happening, right? So I don't want to see an eliminator for WBC. If Wilder's going to fight somebody, I don't think it should be anybody that gets him close to Tyson Fury. So that means no Dillian White. I don't want to see that. To me, it's Prince Charles Martin or Big Baby Miller. And then let him assess whether he wants to continue doing it, because he's getting older too. And I know it's going to get harder for him to get up for the fight, given everything that's happened and injuries. I know he's had his hand injury and everything else. And so I'm also looking at his long term. Maybe he takes 1 or 2 more fights that are just decent fights just to say, I'm still here and I'm not completely taken out of the business, but he's not going to go after these guys that are anywhere near a WBC eliminator or the WBC title or the Lineum. Now, if Tyson Fury decides to hang it up, which I don't think he will, but let's say he does, then that opens an opportunity for Wilder to jump in there and then get the belt back at minimum before he decides to retire. That's just my gut on that one. I'm really upset people I keep saw this Jared Anderson dude and then Frank Sanchez. I'm like, come on, man, this is a joke. So anyway, that's what we got. There was a couple other outcomes on the boxing side. I'm not going to talk about those because those are not, to me, those are not like the top level, the top tier. And ultimately, I'm going to wait till next weekend where I'm going to kind of do a more omnibus talk about the different events that are happening and what's going on in the sport of boxing, because they are kind of finalizing some fights. I was seeing some other fights getting signed and another finalization of fights. And so I'm really excited about the future in February in particular. But I want to give them a chance to finalize some more of these fights so I can talk about them as well. But today was really more about Mr. Gary Russell Jr., shifts in the featherweight division, and what does that mean? We got some really top dogs at featherweight, some sharks that are not necessarily power fighters, but they are the draws. They're willing, they're skilled. They're really skilled fighters. So featherweight's going to be something to watch. In addition to lightweight, I think is good to watch. Welterweight's about to be good to watch. We're not quite there yet, but I think it will be. Heavyweight, I think, is on a little bit of a life support thanks to what happened to Wilder, but hopefully heavyweight can get back in there. And then we'll just watch all the other ones. Super flyweight's going to be exciting next February. This February event with Rung Vijay and Quadras. Dial in for that one. And of course, Chaco Estrada, the rubber match. There's a lot happening in February, so tune in. Keep it tight. Next weekend, I will do a little bit more coverage on some of these new fights that are on the verge of being signed.